The desert was parched to the bone, and the wind blew like it remembered grief. There was a time the land had carried music, the hush of creek water through cottonwood, the lowing of cattle across morning frost, the slow creak of porch boards under a rocking chair. But in the spring of 1887, the land was mean. Mean like a whip, mean like a lie left too long. It cracked bones and stole breath. It stripped color from the earth and names from the dead. Up in the high flats near what the maps used to call Teller's Post, Boaz Mercer rode without speaking. Not to himself, not to the land. His horse, a sway-backed mare named Daisy, limped from a nail wound caught 3 weeks prior. The limp was worse that morning, stiff from the cold. Still, she carried him forward like she always had. Quiet, loyal, tired. Boaz's gloves were worn to the string. Leather that used to shine like creek-wet bark now cracked and bled through at the seams. His fingers stung, but he didn't bother fixing them. There was no one to shake hands with anymore. He'd buried his last steer at dawn. No marker, no prayer. Just dirt on a beast that had followed him through 3 dry winters. The ground had been too hard to dig deep, but he'd done it anyway. And when it was done, he hadn't even wiped the sweat from his eyes. He just turned and rode. He should have gone home. Should have boiled beans over the cast iron and turned in with nothing but silence to meet him. But the wind had changed, shifted like a warning across his cheek. It carried sand with it, not whipping and cruel, but soft, brushing the brim of his hat like a whisper from something that didn't speak English or prayer. He nudged Daisy off the main trail. It was the second knock that made him stop. At first he thought it might be wind through old timber, but it came again, hollow, muffled, slow, like a heartbeat that had lost its rhythm. Boaz reined in the mare. She huffed once, uneasy. He narrowed his eyes toward the sagging husk of the Langley place, what was left of it. Folks said it burned near 10 years ago, said there were screams in the fire, said a girl went missing, maybe 2. But folks said all kinds of things once the train stopped running. Nobody lived out here anymore. Not by choice. Still, the knock came again. Slow, unapologetic. Boaz dismounted. The wind stirred a lazy dust devil near the split-rail fence, now collapsed like old bones. He stepped over it, boots crunching on dry thistle and weed. The house loomed ahead. Not a house, really. More a carcass of one. One window left, hanging crooked, like a blind eye watching him back. The porch groaned beneath his weight. Then the knock again, from below. He paused. Then slowly, he crouched. Near the back of the ruin, beneath a patch of cracked tile and weeds, was a cellar door. Iron hinges rusted. The padlock had long since snapped. The handle, when he touched it, was warm. Boaz stilled. That warmth didn't come from the sun. He pulled it open. The smell hit him first. Sour, wet, and old. Mold and meat, like something forgotten in a root cellar too long. Darkness poured up in thick rolls. He lowered himself onto the first stair, then the next. It was narrow, the kind of narrow made by hands and too little space. The air grew cooler, heavier. And then he saw her. Huddled in the far corner, half in shadow, was a girl, maybe 19, maybe less. Skin pale like wet flour, hair a tangled mess matted to her cheeks. One wrist chained to a rusted pipe. The other lay limp in her lap. Her dress, or what remained of one, was torn and streaked in dried mud and something darker. Her feet were bare. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She didn't scream. She just stared. And Boaz felt a tremor deeper than any fear he'd known. He knelt. She flinched. Drew back like a struck dog. He didn't move. He saw the bruises then, purple turning yellow, old and new stacked like rings of a tree. Her eyes never left his. Boaz pulled the bone-handled knife from his belt. He didn't speak. Words had no use here. The blade slid under the chain link, careful not to touch her skin. It took time. Rusted metal groaned as he worked. The silence between them was thick with breath and something unspoken, something that made his knuckles tremble just slightly. At last, the final link gave. The chain dropped. She didn't move. He stood and offered his hand. She didn't take it. Then slowly, her fingers reached. He pulled her up. She stumbled once but didn't fall. Her eyes found the stair. Then the dim light above. And she moved toward it like someone remembering what light meant. They emerged into the wind. The sky was turning bruised violet. The sun nothing more than an ember between two hills. He took off his duster and wrapped it around her. She sank into it, silent. Didn't ask where they were going. Didn't ask who he was. He lifted her onto Daisy. She winced as the saddle met her bruises, but didn't cry out. He climbed behind her, steadying her with one arm. Her head rested against his chest, heartbeat fluttering like a moth in a jar. They rode west. Neither spoke. Then the shot came. Sharp, close. Not a hunter's warning, but a message. The horse jolted. Boaz pulled her down with him, shielding her body. Another shot screamed past his ear. Close. Too close. He spurred Daisy hard. Dust kicked up behind them. The wind carried it like smoke from something that had just burned. He didn't look back. Didn't need to. He knew the kind of men who left girls chained in cellars, and he knew they never stopped at the first shot. They rode hard. The dry land rose into hills where fog kissed the scrub, and the night cooled the wind. The sky behind them boiled with darkness. They rode until the land curved downward into a gulch of thorn and twisted mesquite. There, under an old sandstone overhang, Boaz had once hunted rabbits beneath. They stopped. He helped her down. She sagged against him, legs weak. "You're safe," he said. She didn't answer, but her fingers clutched his shirt like maybe, just maybe, she believed it. He built a fire. Small. No smoke. Just enough warmth to push back the cold that came with fog. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She sat, arms tight around her knees, face hollow. "Can you eat?" he asked. She nodded. He handed her jerky and biscuit. She chewed like she didn't taste it. He poured coffee from his saddlebag canteen. She sniffed it, then looked at him sideways. "You drink first." He took a gulp, grimaced. Wouldn't poison a stranger, especially not with coffee. That'd be murder. A twitch at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but near. She sipped, set the cup down. He waited a long time, then said, "Name's Boaz." She looked into the fire. Then, Nora Vale. That your given name or the one they gave you?" "It's mine," she said. Firm. He nodded. They sat quiet. Then she said, "Maybe a year. Maybe more." He didn't ask what she meant. She said it anyway. "In that cellar. They brought food. Just enough to keep breath in. Said I had to break before I could be worthy. Took turns telling me that." Boaz looked away. "I ran once," she continued. "Got to Sandalmar. Hid under a cattle cart. But I coughed. They broke my foot." Silence. "Second time I got the whip. That was the last." He didn't interrupt. "They said they'd let me out when I stopped talking back. You didn't." "No." That one word, "no," held more weight than a sermon. "You were going to die in there." "I already had," she said. "Just hadn't laid down yet." He passed her the flask from his coat. "Got some rye left." She took it. Coughed after one sip. "Burns. Means it's working." Then quiet again. Finally, she said, "You didn't have to take me." Boaz stared into the fire. "I've done enough walking away. Didn't like what it made me." She looked at him sharp. "You lost someone." He nodded. "Wife. 5 years back. Fever came fast. Took the baby too. That why you're out here? No, I'm out here 'cause I forgot how to be around people. She shifted closer. What happens now? We ride to Dry Creek Crossing. Talk to the sheriff. Will he listen? He's fair. But you'll have to speak. I will, she said, if you stand beside me. I'll stand. They sat like that, side by side, fire burning low. Then a branch snapped in the canyon. Both froze. Boaz grabbed his rifle. Nora pressed behind him, silent. Another snap. Then the flap of wings. Just a crow. Not this time. Not yet. We ride at first light, Boaz said. I don't want to go back, she whispered. You have to. It's the only way they pay. She nodded, then asked, Will they come? Yes. And if they do, I shoot first. She was quiet a long time, then asked, Do you believe in God? He paused. Used to. What changed? Met men who said they spoke for him. They didn't sound like forgiveness. She reached over and laid her hand on his. Her fingers were cold, her grip steady. You're not like them. He didn't answer, not because he doubted her, but because he feared she might be wrong. Then came the shot. One crash through the canyon, clean and cold, and Boaz knew they were not alone. The fog didn't come slow. It rolled in fast, thick like judgment with a mind of its own. Long before the first light crept over the high mesas, before the birds dared stir, the fog had arrived. It came down the hills not like weather, but like warning, curling through the brush, seeping into the narrow gullies, blanketing stone and thorn like a shroud. It didn't blow or shift. It settled, patient and watching. Nora Vale blinked into the white. Her breath made small clouds that vanished quick. Boaz sat beside her, motionless except for his fingers turning over a twig near the fire's edge. He hadn't slept, not fully. She hadn't either. Above them, a warped branch of mesquite creaked, slow and steady, like an old rocking chair. The wind was still. The land was listening. Earlier, while he stirred the coals back to life with a flat stick, she'd caught sight of a picture nailed crooked to his satchel. The faces were mostly burned away. 2 adults, 1 small child, blackened by time and fire. But one corner had survived, just enough to show the edge of a woman's collar and a child's fingertip clutched in her palm. She hadn't asked, but she hadn't forgotten either. They were leaving soon, heading east toward the town. Still wrapped in his duster, Nora leaned closer to the fire, but not for warmth. There were no dreams last night, just flashes. Her fingers still remembered the feel of cold iron. Her ears still strained to hear a door creaking open that never came. Boaz poured coffee into the tin cup and passed it over. She sniffed it, gave him a sideways glance. He chuckled faintly. Same poison as last night. She took a sip, grimaced. I believe you. They ate in silence. Dry biscuit, hard jerky. It wasn't food for comfort, just fuel for running. She stared into the fire. I dreamed of silence, she said. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that waits for screaming to start again. He didn't speak. I don't know how to be outside anymore. I forgot how the world moves without someone watching me all the time. Boaz stared past the flames. Takes time. To trust it. To trust yourself. A gust rolled through the overhang. Not strong, but enough to scatter ashes. She pulled the blanket tighter. You ever get free of it? She asked. No. Thought so. But it quiets, he added. Not all at once. Not always for good. But it does. The fog had thickened. Even the firelight now felt like it came from underwater. The horse gave a low huff from where she stood, tethered beyond the overhang, her outline barely visible. Boaz stood and scanned the ridgeline. Nothing moved. We can ride soon. Get ahead of it. Of them? She asked. Of the story, he replied. She lifted her chin. You think it matters what story we tell? They've already written one for me, and it ends with me chained again. Or buried somewhere quiet. His eyes darkened. Then we write a better one. They packed quick, quiet, efficient. Boaz helped her into the saddle. She no longer winced at every movement, though she gritted her teeth as her thigh scraped the stirrup. Her hands, raw but healing, clutched the reins like a prayer. They rode through the canyon without speaking. The fog clung to the gulch walls like the breath of ghosts. The trail, once familiar to Boaz, now twisted in odd ways, bends where there'd been none, stones misplaced. He slowed the mare, narrowed his eyes. This fog don't feel natural. Nora glanced around. Feels like it's hiding something. Or hiding us. They passed the place where a cougar had once taken his best heifer. Boaz had shot it clean through the eye from 60 feet. He remembered that day with a mix of guilt and pride. Today, even that scar on the land seemed swallowed. Do you think they followed us? She asked. No sound. No tracks. They don't need to. They always find me. His fingers tightened on the reins. Not this time. It was near midday when the fog began to thin, just enough that the outline of buildings came into view on the far ridge. Dry Creek Crossing. The town didn't bustle. It never had. But there was always the sound of something alive, a dog barking, a hammer tapping. Today, the silence was unnatural. They rode through slow. Boaz kept his hat low, but Nora sat tall. Her face carried no shame, only a wary kind of defiance. The blacksmith glanced up once, squinted, looked away. A woman hanging laundry paused with a clothespin mid-air, then turned and went back inside. Boaz said nothing. Let them stare, Nora muttered. He gave a small grunt, not bitter, not amused. That's the trouble. I owe none of them a thing, but they still expect payment. They stopped before the chapel. A warped sign above read, Dry Creek Chapel, Law, Word, and Justice. Someone had scratched out Word with a knife. Inside, it smelled of tobacco, sweat, and fading incense. Sheriff Elias Danvers sat behind a wide desk with a scuffed star pinned to his vest. He was older than the town, and wore his badge like a confession. A slow man, but not a stupid one. He glanced up and stood when he saw her. Ma'am, he said careful. Boaz spoke before she could. Found her out west, Teller's Post, in the cellar of the old Langley place. Danvers' mouth tightened. That place is condemned, has been since the fire. Well, someone kept it warm. He turned to her. You able to speak for yourself, miss? She stepped forward. Her voice was hoarse but steady. My name is Nora Vale. I was taken against my will, held by men who called themselves guardians, passed around like a mule with forged papers. I tried to run. They broke me, chained me. Danvers swallowed hard. He opened his ledger, handed her a pencil. You remember the name they registered you under? They had many. I only have one. She bent and scrawled it. Nora Vale Danvers studied the writing, then nodded once. Names are for the living, he murmured. She met his eyes. I plan to stay that way. He closed the book with a soft thud. You'll be safe here for now. But if these men got pull, legal or not, they'll try and twist this. Best keep ahead of it. Boaz stepped forward. We're heading north, my place. Off Ridge Road. Danvers whistled under his breath. That trail's been dead since the floods. I've still got feet. Danvers handed her a second sheet. It ain't much, but it starts the paper trail. You stay in town, they'll find her. And then it's her word against their silver. Nora folded the page. She moved to the door, then stopped. Across the street, a man leaned against the post outside the tailor's shop. Tall, lean, brown coat, boots clean, hat low. He stared without blinking. Boaz followed her gaze. You know him? Jedediah Crane. The name tasted like ash. Go inside, Boaz said, voice low. No. If I run, I look guilty. You look strong. She stood still. Jedediah tipped his hat, smiled. Slow. Cold. Then turned and walked off, like a man choosing the hour he'd return. He'll come, she whispered. Jedediah don't ever forget what he thinks belongs to him. The town of Dry Creek Crossing never forgot a sin, just buried it under silence and dust. The wind had changed by afternoon. It rolled through Dry Creek Crossing with the quiet intention of a preacher closing his Bible. Not loud, but final. Dust lifted in low swirls along the boardwalk, brushing the boots of townsfolk who didn't want to be seen looking, but watched anyway. Dry Creek had never been a loud place, but it was the sort of town where news was carved into glances and gossip passed faster than a telegram. Nora Vale stood in front of the chapel's steps, not yet climbing them. Her boots, borrowed from the sheriff's widow's closet, were cracked at the toe, but fit better than she expected. A blue thread dangled from the hem of the borrowed skirt, dancing with the wind like it had forgotten it came from a prison dress. Behind her, Boaz Mercer waited without speaking. He leaned against the hitching post, rifle slung over his shoulder, hat pulled low. His silence wasn't out of caution anymore. It was habit. The kind of stillness learned by men who have buried too many things and never said the right words over them. The fog that had followed them from the hills was gone now, burned off by the noon sun. In its place was clarity, the kind that dried out lies and made truths look bare. Inside the chapel-turned courtroom, Sheriff Danvers was writing something in his ledger. The scratch of his pen echoed like thunder in the high rafters. No hymns here anymore. Just facts written in ink and prayed over in silence. Boaz opened the door for Nora. She stepped inside, not flinching, not hesitating. Her face carried more than bruises now. It carried defiance, the soft kind that doesn't rise in volume but settles deep like tree roots. Danvers looked up. You ready? She nodded, but instead of answering, she walked straight to the table and picked up the ledger. Danvers offered her a pencil. Take your time. This makes it official as anything in this town gets. Nora pressed the pencil to paper. Her hand trembled at first, then stilled. She didn't just write, she pressed hard, as if to carve her name into the page itself. Nora Vale. The letters stood clear, dark, and sure. Danvers looked at it, then at her. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He closed the book slowly. Names are for the living. She met his eyes. Then I'm finally living. Outside. The sound of hammering echoed from the far end of town. A sign being nailed to the post office, or maybe a coffin lid. In Dry Creek, you couldn't always tell the difference. Boaz stepped forward. She's staying with me, up at Mercer's Bluff. Danvers raised a brow. You planning on filing for witness protection or marriage? Boaz didn't blink. Marriage. The sheriff stared at him. You sure about that, Mercer? Boaz looked at Nora, then back. I wouldn't take it back if I could. Nora's face didn't move, but something in her eyes shifted. She didn't speak. Not yet. Danvers nodded once. I can have the preacher brought in. Witness, too. We'll do it under law. Not yet, she said quietly. Let the papers catch up first. Fair enough. Boaz stepped outside. Nora followed. She squinted into the sun, a sky the color of scrubbed metal, sharp and indifferent. Across the street, the tailor's shop was still, its curtains drawn. Then a shape stepped from behind the corner. Jedediah Crane. He leaned against the split fence like he'd grown there. Same brown coat, same smug tilt to his mouth. He tipped his hat, just slightly, a mockery of manners. Nora froze. Boaz saw her stop and turned. You know him? Yes. She spoke the name without fear this time, without flinching. Jedediah Crane. He's the one who bought me first. The one who signed the papers. Boaz didn't reach for his rifle. Not yet. Jedediah didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. Like he was measuring her, or waiting for her to break. Boaz said low, "Go inside. If I do, I look scared. You look brave." She didn't move, and she didn't look away. Jedediah finally smiled, a small thing full of rot. Then he turned and walked off, casual, slow, like he owned time. Boaz's jaw clenched. They mounted the horse soon after. The town watched from behind curtains and shutters and half-closed doors. Not one person stepped out. Not one offered help. As they passed the general store, the bell above the door rang once, then again, but no one came out. No one greeted them. Dry Creek Crossing had seen women ride in bruised before. It had seen men ride out full of rage. It hadn't always chosen to interfere. Boaz guided the mare toward the road north. Ridge Trail had not seen a wagon in years. The storm last fall had washed out half the ridge, and no one had bothered to clear it. It was the kind of road men only rode when they had no other place left. The sun was behind them, and the bluff ahead was cloaked in shadow. Nora leaned forward slightly in the saddle. Her fingers brushed the reins with a reverence that wasn't for the horse, but for the freedom they carried. Boaz didn't speak, but he rode close enough that she could hear the rhythm of his breath. Steady, measured, like a man prepared to be still or strike, whichever the hour demanded. By the time they reached the halfway point, the canyon winds had picked up again. Sagebrush twisted in the current. Somewhere far off, a hawk called once and was gone. They camped that night in a hollow near an old spring that had long since dried up. Boaz unrolled the bedrolls while Nora searched for dry sticks. They spoke little, not from distance, but from the comfort of not needing to explain silence. Later, as she stared into the firelight, Boaz watched her from across the flames. The shadows carved her face into lines that made her look older, wiser, dangerous. "You're different today," he said. "I remembered my name," she replied. "You think he'll come?" "Yes." "You afraid?" She poked the fire. A spark leapt and died. "No, I've already been through hell. Men like him don't scare me. Not anymore." Boaz leaned back on one elbow. The stars blinked overhead, cold and clean. "You going to shoot if he comes?" She smiled, just barely. "I don't miss twice." He chuckled once. Low and quiet. They didn't say anything else that night. The fire burned low. The canyon held its breath, and just before sleep took them, she whispered, "I want it written down, not just said over smoke and fear. I want it legal. I want it to count." Boaz didn't open his eyes, but he answered, "It will." "He'll come," she whispered. "Jedediah don't ever forget what he thinks belongs to him." The sky turned copper and blood by the time they reached Mercer's Bluff, too quiet for comfort, too red to be kind. By late afternoon, the trail bent upward into the dry ridgeline where scrub brush gave way to harder land. A hawk circled once overhead, its shadow slicing across the path as if drawing a line they'd just crossed. The world behind them looked smaller now, Dry Creek Crossing only a blur against the dust. The world ahead was thinner, quieter, and stripped of the noise men often mistook for law. Mercer's Bluff wasn't much, not anymore. What had once been a working cattle line had long since buckled under the weight of drought and death. The barn sagged to the west, a drunk old man leaning into the slope. The fence had surrendered years ago, rails half buried in the high grass, gate rusted open like a forgotten promise. And the cabin itself, 2 rooms and a lean-to, stood crooked against the ridge rock, its roof patched with old tin and broken slates. Boaz dismounted first. He walked toward the porch without speaking, his boots stirring powdery dirt. The wind, soft for once, carried the scent of dry wood and old tobacco. Nora slid down carefully, landing with a faint wince. Her legs trembled from the ride, but she didn't ask for help. She looked at the house, one hand on her hip, the other brushing dust from her borrowed skirt. "Not much," Boaz muttered, pushing open the door. She stepped in behind him. Her eyes scanned everything in silence. The iron stove, long cold. The cot pressed against the wall with a wool blanket folded with military neatness. A table made from a repurposed door, its corners splintered and worn smooth by time. A single shelf with a face-down Bible and a rusted oil lamp. There was no mirror, no pictures, just air that smelled like old leather, pipe smoke, and something faintly sweet, the ghost of honey once spilled. "It's more than I ever had," she said, and the words settled like truth between them. Boaz opened the shutters. Outside, the sky was starting to bruise. A storm gathered slow above the canyon edge, not urgent yet, but not waiting either. The horizon looked like it was holding something back. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said. "You don't have to." "I do." There was no shame in his voice, and no offense in hers. Just the kind of respect born from people who understood what pain sounded like in someone else's silence. She moved to the basin and scrubbed her hands raw, then her face, until the grime peeled away and left behind something pale and bruised but steady. When she sat at the table, she caught her reflection in the base of the tin cup, a flash of her eyes, clearer than before. Boaz brought in firewood, set it by the stove. She watched him for a moment before asking, "Why did you bring me here?" He paused, stared into the hearth. "Not just kindness," she added. "No, not only that." He lit the fire. It took slow, catching in uneven spurts until the orange glow settled and danced in the dim corners of the room. "I used to think I was a quiet man," he said finally. "Turns out I was just waiting for someone to speak to." She blinked, looked down. "I thought I was grieving," he continued. "Maybe I was just hiding. You pulled me out without even trying." Her voice dropped. "Is that why you lied to the sheriff? Told him we were married?" He didn't look away. "Yes. You can't take that back. I wouldn't if I could." A long silence stretched. "You don't know me. I know what you survived. That's more than most ever face." She rose and walked to the door. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rustling through dry grass and whispering against the tin roof like a warning. The sky was now a patchwork of red and gray. "When I was 10, my mama said if I ever got lost, I should follow the moon. It would take me home." He leaned on the table, elbows rough against the grain. "And did it?" She turned to him. The fire behind her made a halo of her dark hair. "I didn't expect it would lead me to a man with coffee worse than the devil's spit." He smiled barely. "That moon saved me," she said, "and so did you. I don't know what that means yet." He watched her, waited. "But if you ask me tomorrow," she took a breath, "I might say yes." A gust slammed the window shutter, then rattled it loose. Boaz crossed the room and latched it again. But his hand paused. The wind had changed, and not just the weather. Nora stood still, eyes narrowing. 3 riders crested the bluff, moving slow, single file. Dust curled at their heels like smoke. At the front was a tall man in a brown coat. His boots gleamed like they hadn't touched dirt. His face was a blur against the coming dark, but Nora didn't need clarity. She'd memorized him years ago. Her hand drifted toward the shelf. Boaz's revolver lay waiting. She picked it up and checked the cylinder. 6 shots. Boaz was already stepping outside, rifle across his chest, jaw tight. She followed, standing beside him. Jedediah Crane pulled his horse to a stop 10 yards out. His companions flanked him. Clay Barlow with his crooked grin and mangled hand, and Wes Drummond, a walking slab of meat with a shotgun too big for reason. Jedediah smiled. "Nora," he said, like tasting something familiar. You gave us a hell of a time. Boaz didn't move. You speak one more word like that and I'll feed it to the buzzards. Crane ignored him. She's mine. Lawfully signed and purchased. I got the papers in my saddlebag, clean and sealed. But I'm willing to forget it, if she walks back now and keeps quiet. I'd rather be dead, Nora said flatly. Barlow laughed, ugly and sharp. You going to shoot us all, Mercer? Boaz didn't flinch. If that's what it takes. Jedediah leaned forward slightly, voice still smooth. You think the sheriff's going to back you? He's got no teeth. You're just a dried-up rancher with nothing but dust and a guilty conscience. Boaz's voice dropped like iron. Sheriff doesn't need to. I've got something better. Nora stepped forward, chin high, voice steady. I'm his wife, legally by witness and vow. You take one step toward me, and you're attacking a married woman. A silence followed, not long, but heavy. Jedediah laughed once. That ain't binding. You can't marry stolen property. I'm not property, she said. Not anymore. And I wasn't stolen. I was freed. Drummond shifted in the saddle. Barlow raised his rifle. Boaz fired first. The crack split the dusk. Barlow's gun flew from his hand, blood pouring from a shattered knuckle. He screamed, dropped to the ground. Then the world broke open. Gunfire roared. Boaz grabbed Nora and pulled her behind the water trough. Bullets tore through the porch posts. He fired again. 2 clean shots. One struck Drummond in the shoulder, sent him reeling behind a wagon frame. Smoke twisted in the air. Another shot splintered the cabin's doorframe. Nora ducked, heart pounding. Then she looked at Boaz. You said you needed me to shoot. You ready? She rose, fired over his shoulder. The last man scrambled back. I don't miss twice, she muttered. Boaz rolled to the side, fired again. Screams, then silence. Only one left. Jedediah burst from behind the barn, pistol raised. But Nora was already standing. He froze. She raised the revolver. Steady. I was 10 when you bought me, she said. 14 when you chained me. 19 when I broke. He opened his mouth. Girl, don't, she fired. He dropped to his knees. Blood bloomed across his chest. The look on his face wasn't fear. It was surprise. Like he never thought the dog would bite back. He collapsed. Didn't move again. I was 10 when you bought me. 14 when you chained me. And 19 when I broke. She fired. Crane's body fell like a secret finally told. The silence after death is heavier than the gunfire before it. Dawn didn't come gently. It rose with the smell of smoke still curling from spent shell casings and blood drying into the dirt. The sun cast a wide golden stain across the ridge, exposing everything. The cracked trough that had shielded them, the wagon torn with bullet holes, and the 3 bodies that no longer cast shadows. Boaz stood at the edge of the bluff, his rifle hanging loose by his side, not because he no longer needed it, but because he couldn't lift it just yet. His breath came slow, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. In war, he had seen worse, but war at least came with sides. This felt different, closer, personal, a reckoning drawn with paper and powder. Behind him, Nora Vale moved without hesitation. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't numb. She was methodical. She gathered what was left of Crane's saddlebag, dug out the forged documents, now stained and torn. Her hands were steady as she unfolded them. They used this, she said, voice flat. Signed it with a name that never belonged to them. Boaz glanced back. What are you going to do with it? Burn it, then replace it. He nodded. Sheriff Elias Danvers arrived not long after. He came alone, riding slow, one hand resting easy on the pommel of his saddle. When he reached the rise, he stopped and took off his hat, not as an officer of the law, but as a man paying quiet respect to the truth already laid bare. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He took one look at the bodies, at Nora standing tall with soot on her hands and blood on her sleeve, and he nodded. "I reckon justice already passed through." Nora stepped toward him. "We need it written down. Legal, not just said over smoke and fear." Danvers blinked. He studied her. This woman who had once stood shaking inside his chapel, now unflinching in the morning light. "The wedding?" he asked. She nodded. "Make it real." Boaz walked forward, stopping beside her. "Yes," he said simply. Danvers reached into his coat and pulled out the ledger. "There's law. And then there's what's right. Your lucky Dry Creek still has a preacher." The preacher arrived a few hours later, coat inside out, Bible missing half its pages. He was a tall, thin man with a limp, smelling faintly of clove and varnish. He didn't ask for backstory, didn't ask for proof. He opened the book where the binding still held and cleared his throat. They stood beneath the old corral arch, where wild rose once grew and now only wire remained. The preacher spoke words soft and slow, meant not to impress, but to anchor. Boaz looked at Nora, the way a man looks at land he never thought would be his, not out of conquest, but wonder. Nora looked at Boaz not like a savior, not like a man who had pulled her from a cellar, but like someone who had simply stood still when the world tried to make her disappear. "I do," he said. She didn't pause. "I do." The preacher declared it so. Danvers signed the witness line in the ledger. The preacher made a mark where his hand shook too much to write clear. Wind tugged at the hem of Nora's dress. Sunlight fell through the broken corral fence, slicing the dust in golden beams. Somewhere nearby, a lark began to sing like it had just remembered the notes. Later, Boaz dug 3 graves along the edge of the bluff. No crosses, no stones, just hard-packed earth. Nora placed something at the last grave, a chain, the same one that had once held her to the pipe below Teller's post. It clinked softly as it landed. No ceremony, no words. Let it rust there. That night, they didn't celebrate. There was no feast, no music, no company, just 2 people who had weathered the worst, sitting at a table scarred with old cuts and burn marks. He poured coffee. She made him dump it. They laughed, startled by the sound, as if joy had slipped in unnoticed. The next morning, the snow came, early for the season. It fell gentle at first, brushing the roof in a whisper, then heavier, blanketing the ridge in silver. The air turned crisp and still. The ranch creek, long dry, groaned under the weight of frozen breath. Boaz rose before light. He stoked the fire like a man caring for something fragile. Water hissed in the basin. The stove crackled to life. Outside, stars still clung to the sky, stubborn and proud. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and warmth, a kind of warmth that didn't come from flame alone. Nora stood by the window, wrapped in a worn shawl stitched with roses. Her hair hung in a single long braid down her back, black against the pale wool. "You were talking in your sleep again," she said without turning. "What was I saying?" "You were arguing with the fence post," he grunted. "Stubborn post." She smiled slightly and took the cup he handed her. They drank in silence. The world beyond the glass shimmered in white. "I had a dream," she said finally. "I was back in that cellar. But this time, there was no door." Boaz's hand stilled around the mug. "But I wasn't afraid," she continued. "You were above, calling my name. I knew I wasn't alone in there anymore." He reached across the table. She didn't hesitate to take his hand. A knock came at the door. Not the kind that came from nightmares, not a sound made of dread. This was steady, measured, real. Boaz opened the door. A boy stood there, 12, maybe 13, bundled in a coat too big, boots torn at the sole, lips cracked from the wind. "You Boaz Mercer," the boy asked. That's right. The boy dug into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, stamped and sealed. Sheriff sent me. Came from the capital. Said it's for your wife. Nora stepped beside Boaz, brows furrowing. She took the letter, hands careful, eyes scanning the official print. She didn't speak. Not at first. The message was short, but the line at the bottom was all that mattered. The men claiming legal custody have been found guilty. Their claims annulled, all charges dismissed. Nora folded the letter with slow hands. Her lips trembled, not with fear, but from the weight finally lifting. Tell the sheriff thank you, she said quietly. The boy nodded. Boaz handed him a biscuit from the tin. The boy took it, tipped his hat, and disappeared into the falling snow. Nora shut the door behind him. She stood still for a moment, then laughed, sharp and sudden, a sound that cracked the ice in the air. She clutched the letter like something holy. I thought it would never end, she said, spinning once in place. Boaz leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I didn't think you'd stay, he said. She stopped, breathless. When? After the trial, after the graves. I thought maybe you'd want to start new somewhere else, without me. Her gaze narrowed. Is that what you wanted? No. Then why say it? He stared at the fire, then at her. Because I need you to know something. I didn't save you. She stepped closer. You saved yourself. I just showed up. She shook her head. No. You listened. When no one else did. He looked at her with something fragile behind his eyes. I'm not a man of many words, Nora, but I meant what I said at that altar. Every damn syllable. She leaned in, rested her forehead against his chest. You're my husband, she whispered, and you're the bravest person I've ever known. Behind them, the fire burned steady. Later that day, they rode into town, not for hearings, not for hiding, but for supplies, flour, salt, 2 wool blankets, a book of seeds. Nora picked out fabric for new curtains. Boaz didn't understand why glass needed dressing, but he let her choose anyway. On their way back, they paused at the chapel. The preacher was sweeping the floor, humming some tune older than the town itself. Nora stepped in alone. Boaz waited outside. She knelt, not to beg, but to speak. I forgive them, she said, not to God, not to the preacher, but to herself. Outside, Boaz looked up as snowflakes began to fall again, slow and wide. That night, they built a new fence together, straighter than the last. She sang while she worked, something in Spanish, or maybe older than even that. When the stars came, she touched his face. I planted the seed you gave me, she said. He frowned. What seed? The peach pit, she said. You thought it was a joke. Not me. He stared at her. Do you think it'll take? She nodded. It already has. I thought maybe you'd leave, Boaz says. She shakes her head. Not until the seed I planted starts to bloom. Some mornings the wind forgets how to move, as if even the land is holding still to see what happens next. The dawn broke clean. No fog, no frost, just gold washing down over the ridge like the sky had been holding its breath all night, and finally let it go. Light slipped in through the crooked window of the cabin, brushing Nora Vale's cheek as she stirred, then sat upright in the bed she now shared. For a while, she didn't move. Just let the warmth rest on her shoulders like a quilt, soaking into the quiet. She rose before Boaz, stepped out barefoot onto the porch, still wrapped in her shawl. The air was sharp, but not biting, just cool enough to remind her she was alive. Below the bluff, the land stretched wide and honest, hills soft with green, snow now melted into dark veins of wet earth. The world looked gentler somehow, as if the violence of weeks before had drained the fever out of the ground. Behind her, Boaz stirred. She heard the faint creak of the cot frame, the low sound of his feet hitting the floor. Then silence again. He never rose fast, not out of laziness, but out of respect for the morning, like he didn't want to disturb whatever peace had chosen to show up. She stayed out a moment longer. The smell of wood smoke began to rise from the chimney. Coffee soon followed, the bitter, scorched kind that Boaz still insisted was drinkable. A dog barked faint in the distance. Probably a neighbor's hound, a mile off. The canyon echoed everything these days. The porch boards creaked behind her. "Come inside," Boaz said, voice still rough with sleep. "Not yet," she answered. He didn't press, just let the door stay open behind her. Later, she returned to the table where breakfast waited. Bread warmed over the fire, a bit of salted pork, and the coffee she always made him pour out and redo. He did it this time, without protest. They ate together in the hush of old wood and sunbeams. A pot clinked gently on the stove. Outside, a breeze lifted and turned the air sweet with sage. "There's something I want to show you," Nora said. Boaz looked up from his plate. "Come." She led him around the cabin, past the barn now halfway rebuilt, to a patch of soil fenced off with old wire and careful stone. Inside the square, a small stick had been planted, and beside it, a single sprout no higher than a thumb. He blinked at it. "That's the peach pit," she said. "You threw it out." "I didn't." He crouched down, ran a calloused thumb over the tender green leaf. "You think it'll make it?" She folded her arms. "I already told you. It has." The sky turned soft above them. A hawk soared across the horizon, riding thermals. Somewhere to the west, thunder muttered. Not a storm, just a reminder the land still had moods. That afternoon, they went back to Dry Creek Crossing. Not for trial, not for justice, but for restocking. Boaz needed nails. Nora needed soap, a few buttons, a length of blue cotton she'd been thinking of since her last visit. She carried a small coin purse now, not heavy, but enough to matter. As they passed the chapel, she slowed. "I want to go in," she said. Boaz nodded. He stayed outside, leaned against the fence post like always. Inside, the chapel was empty. The pews had been wiped down. The windows, streaked with the residue of smoke and sun, still cast colored light across the floor. The pulpit leaned slightly, and the Bible left open on it was missing pages, but what remained was enough. She walked down the aisle and knelt, not because she'd been told to, and not because she thought God needed proof, but because it felt right. Her eyes stayed open. "I forgive them," she whispered. It wasn't a confession, not a prayer, just a declaration spoken into the still air of a quiet church, not to make peace with God, but to release the weight from her own chest. Outside, Boaz watched a group of children run past, a boy dragging a tin can behind him on a string. It clattered joyfully. A dog barked. For the first time in months, the town didn't look at him like a man with smoke on his clothes. They nodded. One even tipped a hat. When Nora came out, her face was calm, lighter somehow. He said nothing, just offered his arm. That evening, as the last light faded into the hills, they began work on the final fence post near the southern slope. The soil was stubborn, but the post hole held. Nora packed it down with her boot, humming something. Not a song with words, but a tune carried from another time, older than pain, softer than memory. Boaz worked beside her, hammering the final nail in slow, steady rhythm. As they stood back and admired the line, Nora looked up at the sky. "The stars are coming," he nodded. "Always do." They walked back to the cabin as night settled around them. Inside, the fire crackled, and Boaz lit the oil lamp. Nora placed a new cloth she'd bought across the table, the blue cotton now trimmed and stitched with a row of tiny white knots. She sat and looked at him, then at the shelf where the old Bible still lay, still face down. She reached for it, turned it over, not to read it, just to give it a place again. Boaz didn't speak. She didn't need him to. Later that night, long after they'd gone to bed, Nora rose once more, slipped her feet into the cold floor, and stepped outside, shawl wrapped tight. The wind had stopped. The air was still. Above her, the stars hung like they'd been nailed to the sky. She stood at the edge of the porch, her hands resting on the rail. In the distance, the peach sprout stood, small and brave in the dark. The land no longer felt like it was holding its breath. It exhaled, soft, sure, and free. The door stayed open behind her. The fire crackled warm, and the sky turned gold, as if to say, "This time, stay." Some things in the West never leave you, not the dust in your boots, not the silence between sunfall and supper, and certainly not the stories whispered in wind that never learned how to forget, long after the gun smoke fades and the names in town ledgers blur with age. Some truths still ride the land like shadows at high noon, quiet, steady, unyielding. You remember the sight of that girl, barefoot and bruised, standing in firelight with a chain in her hand and the courage of 10 men in her voice. You remember the man who had nothing left but a broken ranch and a rusted rifle, and who chose not to save her, but to walk beside her when saving wasn't enough. You think of that cellar door, creaking open like the world waking from something foul, and the dust that clung to her skin like it was trying to keep her from rising. You can still hear the horse hooves over dry canyon stone, and the sound of a revolver clicking shut, not in vengeance, but in resolution. You remember that rusted chain left at the foot of a grave, not out of hate, but so the land would remember. And maybe you see that sprouting peach pit, too, the one planted as a joke, but grown from belief, a seed that took root in a world where nothing soft was supposed to last. Maybe now you can still feel that morning, where she stood on the porch with the whole of the sky stretched above her and chose, for the first time in her life, to stay. Maybe you hear the wind weaving through fence posts they built together, straight and sure, and you realize some fences are meant to keep danger out, and some are just meant to hold the good in. Maybe that oil lamp on the table, flickering warm in the hush, reminds you of all the nights we don't talk about, the ones where healing happens slow and no one notices but the stars. And you remember a boy with chapped lips carrying a letter that wasn't just ink and seal, but the weight of justice finally delivered. You think of that ledger, her name written clear and firm, because names are for the living. You think of coffee poured and poured out again, because someone finally had the decency to make it right. You see Dry Creek Crossing, no longer a town that turns its face, but one where a few folks learned to nod again. And that gunshot, her shot, not as the end of something, but the beginning of what it means to stop being a possession and start being a person. Maybe you don't remember all the names. Maybe you don't have to. Maybe it's enough that you remember the firelight on her cheek, the way she laughed with the letter in her hand, and the way he looked at her like she was something worth building for. Because honor can be buried, but it can't be erased. Because justice might show up late, but when it comes, it speaks loud, even through silence. Because the forgotten woman isn't just a ghost in a cellar. She's the one who might save a whole generation of kindness if we let her. And because sometimes the truth don't need to be shouted, it just needs someone to stand beside it and keep it breathing. If something in this story still lingers with you, if you remember that wind in the canyon, the slow rebuilding of trust, the sound of a song hummed while laying fence posts at dusk, then leave a mark. A sign you still believe in quiet strength and earned peace. Maybe like, maybe comment, maybe just sit in the dark a little longer with the oil lamp burning low and think on it. And if you want to hear another story like this, told slow and true, subscribe to our channel. That's how we know to keep riding the trail with you. Because somewhere out there, another porch waits for morning, Another peach pit is waiting to bloom, and someone's truth, quiet and real, is just beginning to take root.